Amber, you were first to LinkedIn with your take on this. Give it to us now. How do you feel about this? What do you think about what the CPA is doing?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I learned of it last Wednesday. I was at the Cal CPA. They had their member summit in Huntington Beach, and I happened to sit on the government relations committee. So I first heard about it on Wednesday. And much like you said, surprised, I raised my hand and I said, wait a minute, am I hearing this right? Like, has there been a seismic shift in what's going on? Am I really hearing that we're softening on this and this old narrative, like we have to have 150 because of mobility, which I never believed to be true, but was the narrative. And that has definitely shifted. So kudos to the California Board of Accountancy and the Cal CPA for their legislative efforts for starting to write some really meaningful legislation.
And maybe this is the result of that survey that we saw the California Board of Accountancy put out not that long ago. They did a Survey Monkey, and according to a memo that they published last month, got thousands and thousands of responses, over 7,000, and they published the results here. And I want to highlight some of these for you. 89% of respondents agreed that a bachelor's in accounting should fully meet the educational requirements for licensure. I think that is the biggest number we've seen in any of these surveys so far. I recall, David, do you remember what state did it? And it was like 80%, 79%, something like that.
Arizona.
Arizona
the
did.
Paper magazine said Arizona.
And but this is way beyond that. And the AICPA did its own survey, and it was like in the 60s or 70s. But this is quite definitive. I mean, when can you ever get 89% of anybody in this country to agree on anything?
So they went from survey, these results, to writing legislation. Now, no study, we need to have committees. They're like, write the legislation. Like, it's that obvious to them.
So only 11% of respondents in the survey said that they think we should keep the education requirement, or 10% said that. Nearly half of partners/hiring managers would prefer to hire someone with a bachelor's and 2 years of experience, compared to only 10% who preferred an applicant with an advanced degree and 1 year of experience. And most respondents, 76%, would support the removal of the 150 semester unit requirement, even if it impacted a CPA's ability to obtain practice privilege rights in other states. So that, Amber, goes to that mobility argument. Apparently, California CPAs just aren't that concerned about mobility. Why do you think that is as a California CPA?
I mean, I think first and foremost, the results of this survey are really reflecting the sign of the times. We are living in an era where it's not like this pipeline issue is going to happen. We're living it, right? So when I'm in my work as a professional coach, talking to accountants all the time, these are the things I'm hearing. I'm hearing, one is there's not enough levels of review in the system because they don't have enough people to do the work. And then that becomes an issue with the Board of Accountancy, right? Whether you're like the people who say, well, lawyers and doctors, you can't water down the education. State boards exist to protect the public. And right now, the public's not being protected without an adequate amount of people to do the work. So, in California, we have, just like I think across the US at this time, not enough people to do the work, inadequate levels of review, and that is an issue for the public. I think specific to California, I mean, let's be honest, we are a big domino in this system. So we're not the first state that said, hey, let's try and do this legislation. Minnesota did it. And what did AICPA do? They sent letters to all the CPAs in Minnesota, like, oh, this threatens mobility. And I don't think the AICPA has the gumption to try and do that in California. I think California is a huge domino. I would hope other states are already calling California up saying, hey, what are you doing? We want to do this too. And, here we go. Maybe we can really dismantle this thing.
And what's great about what California is doing is they're not just creating the alternative pathway, they are also broadening mobility so that any CPA, I mean, this is all draft legislation, right? Let's just put that, and it hasn't even been drafted yet. They have simply authorized the staff to draft the legislation. But what they want, according to this memo, is that any CPA license in another state will automatically get mobility into California without having to prove that they have the education requirements met, all this nitpicky stuff that you experience when you try to go from one state to another. Let's just streamline that, right?
And that's
Go for it,
interesting
David.
because then the other states are going to copy that. They're like, hey, if it's good enough for California, we should have the same policy.
Yeah, it's like driver's licenses, right? When you drive across a state line, you don't have to go to the DMV and prove that you passed the exam to get licensed in California, right?
Right.
Like that would be a little bit inconvenient, right? So
Yeah. I had a student who sent me a LinkedIn message in response to my post, and they said, help me understand, who is the AICPA versus the CBA? And I think that sometimes we lose sight of that question, right? What is the AICPA responsible for? They're responsible for exam content. NASBA is responsible for administration. The state boards of accountancy have the jurisdiction to say what the educational requirements should be and experience requirements. So just because the AICPA has an opinion about it doesn't mean we have to follow as a state that opinion. And the moment that California says, oh, we're going to recognize a CPA, if you're a CPA wherever, you're a CPA here. And that's a new thing, right? And that's why I've said for a long time, like when we say we can't get rid of the 150-hour rule because of mobility, that's the laziest answer. There's no critical thinking in how do we make this work? And California is paving the way for how we can make it work.
now, to be fair, the AICPA has created the National Pipeline Advisory Group, and they have just issued their report on what to do about this CPA pipeline problem. And I went through it. I took a look at the PDF, and it really is, unless you guys think otherwise, like to me, it looks pretty much like the same thing as the draft report that came out a few months before. And there's no specific immediate recommendations to make changes to fix the pipeline. I think this is my biggest complaint about the AICPA, is that every single initiative seems to be, let's do more research. You know, let's do another survey. Let's gather input from stakeholders. But when it comes time to act, there's nothing there. And why is that? Why can't the AICPA understand that this is urgent and we need to do something like this year?
Well, I think, and I have not looked at the final report, but I think we talked about this before, and you start reading between the lines, some of the language they're using is almost like they're accepting change is coming, but they want to be in control of the change. They don't want all the states going and doing this themselves. They want to be the ones that make the change to this rule.
But then they don't make specific recommendations for the change. It's like very broad, and there's no specific timeline. It's almost like they're afraid to do anything. They just want to talk and talk and talk. And I mean, you look at the numbers, and we are on a plummeting negative trajectory with CPA licensure. Like, there's just not time for this. We're gonna, if we don't do something about this in the next year or two, we will be in a situation where there aren't enough accountants to ensure that financial statements are accurate and free of, misstatement. And that's a threat to our economy.
It truly is. That's the thing that it's interesting in the LinkedIn thread where people are like, there's a few, those 10 percenters, let's refer to them as, they're like, well, you're watering the designation down. I'm like, watering the designation down or protecting the public? I don't know. And to your question of like, okay, the AICPA does surveys and they put out information. I think what they're lacking is boldness in their action, right? And we need to do things faster and quicker. And I get it. I get that it's hard when you're a behemoth organization. You're the Titanic, 1 degree of change, 1 degree of change. But that survey was nice, but the only action I saw to take out of it was to take a pledge. I need more than a pledge. I need some legislation. I need some changes. People need to know that they're being heard, because I would say us on here, and thank you to you two for being advocates against the 150. We've been saying for a long time, something needs to be done. And now I feel like finally affirmed that some action is coming, right? We're turning a corner. Hopefully people will follow. And I think this is fantastic news for the profession.
Really great news. Amber Setter, thank you for joining us to discuss this. Hopefully we'll have you back when the California Board of Accountancy moves to push forward draft legislation to put that to the legislature.
Hey, it just so happens that their next meeting when they're going to talk about the legislation is at Cal State San Marcos in September. And I'm about to move 5 minutes away from Cal State San Marcos. So as long as it's public, I will be there taking copious notes, and I'd be happy to report back.
Excellent. We'll talk to you then. Thanks, Amber.
Thank you.